All right. Thanks for being here. Flobo Boyce, writer, podcaster, comedian. I feel like I could say entertainer, maybe put in broadcaster there with the sports stuff, but we'll go with that for now. For you, what was the creative venture that was the gateway to the next one?
Oh, you also forgot honorary commander of the U.S. Air Force, and I do mean
Yeah,
honorary.
I read that. I'm not sure how that
uh,
occurs. How does that occur?
Man, I just answered a couple emails. We'll get to that in a second. But to
Oh,
answer your
okay.
first question, I always put myself as a writer first. So if I'm doing the comedy stuff, if I'm an auctioneer, if I'm a DJ, am I a blogger, or I am a content creator, it all starts with the script. So I considered everything coming from the written word, and then how I perform that depending on what I'm working on.
Okay. Well, then what everybody else is waiting for now is the Air Force,
Oh yeah.
honorary Air Force.
So I didn't realize this at the time, but actually, I'll take a step back. When I was a kid, I wanted to serve, right? So I'm from Brooklyn originally. Just for context, I just turned 40, so I'm over the hill now. But when I was 16, that was 9/11, right? The Twin Towers, my hometown, came down, and I wanted to serve, but I wasn't eligible to serve in the military at the time. I was a chunky boy. I was way too big, you know. A couple years later, I realized that some Air Force bases have this thing called the honorary commander program where civilians get a title, honorary commandership, and they pair you with a unit to learn more about the unit. So it becomes like mutually beneficial for the individual to get to see how a base runs and how the Air Force works, and for the Air Force, it's kind of a community outreach to show them they're not a big bad neighbor somewhere. So I had applied at my local Air Force base, which is LA Air Force Base, but I'm not sure if your audience knows, it's no longer an Air Force base, it's a Space Force base now. So I got a call from Travis, which is up in Fairfield, and they were like, hey, would you be interested in being an honorary commander up there? And I was like, where the heck is Travis? And so it became this thing where I had to like learn like where it was and how to fly out there. I was like, hey, look, you're in LA. Can you make that commute happen? I was like, it's an honor. I'll find a way to do it. So my unit that I am assigned to is the Band of the Golden West, and they are the Air Force band for Washington, Oregon, and California. They're on tour all the time. I get to see how they work. I get to go to some of the shows. I get to give a little suggestions of how they can outreach other communities. So I always got to say emphasis on honorary, but they give you a little lapel pin and a certificate, which you can see in the background here.
Ah, nice. So no uniform, just the pin.
Yeah, no uniform. I would not claim. Even if they gave me one, I wouldn't wear it. Like I didn't do
I mean,
anything.
a fry cap, like a blue
Yeah,
fry cap, would be good
that'd be kind of
with the
cool. Yeah.
pin. Yeah, I can't remember what we called those. And was that a barracks cover? Is the big round one, or is it the flat one? That's bad. Okay. So then you've been doing that since you were 16.
Oh no, sorry. I guess I got my thing completed. I wanted to be an airman since I was 16. I've been an
Okay.
honorary commander for the past 2.5 years. So
Okay.
it cycles off every 2 years. They bring in a new crop of civilians, but my unit has an irregular cycle because of a retirement. So I'm basically on until this fall. But I've been able to work with them for about 2 years and change.
My best Air Force story. Like if I had it to do over again, I'd probably. I don't know. I don't know if I would try to go into the Air Force first. I've tried to go into the Air Force a couple of years ago, right when I was at the point of too old, but they would take prior service off of your age. And I was like, well, maybe I can be a pilot and fly an A-10 or something. And that would be cool. So that didn't work out because I couldn't make the time frame work. And then I got too old. But in, let's see, Iraqi freedom. So we're at the port of Kuwait. I think it was either the port of Kuwait or Schwaba. And we're outside in the motor pool. I was a Marine, and we're out there sleeping by the Humvees because we've just had them cleaned at the Hershey plant, which is strange that there's a Hershey place in Kuwait in the desert. They're doing chocolate. So we're out there, and it's maybe, I don't know, 120, 130. It's not the hottest it got out there, but it was hot. It's hotter than 29 Palms. And we're sitting out there doing the security on the vehicles so we can load them up onto the transport. And over this big wall, we see a person's head pop up every now and then. And this is like a three-story wall just right by the motor pool. And then we had one of the guys that was with us did a reconnaissance mission inside of the wall, which was an Air Force base. And we figured out that was people on the high dive at the Air Force swimming pool is what we were seeing, was their head would pop over the wall when they were jumping off the diving board. So that gives you a little juxtaposition of the Air Force in the desert versus the Marines in the desert.
Hey, man, it gets hot out there. Man, you got to cool down sometimes, you know?
Yeah. It would have been nice. They didn't let us, they would let us like 2 or 3 in at a time. We couldn't go in as a big group, and we couldn't go to the pool. We could only go to like the little food court area. But anyway, Air Force, it's probably the smarter way to go, but you don't get a sword. So
true.
I gotta go with the sword. So then starting out writing, and you put it in the words of everything's a script. Were you doing script writing to begin with, or like in the format of script writing?
Yeah, I mean, that was the best way to describe it. So I went to film school back in 2007. That's why I came out to California. I was going to be a big filmmaker, like most people will come out here. And my film school, Chapman, they separated you by what was called your emphasis, or what you wanted to go to school for. I was post-production, so editing was my emphasis. But I always wanted to do my own script, because usually by the time the film comes to you, it's already someone else's words, someone else's visual vision, someone else's production design, and you're just trying to put it together to make it make sense. And so you just want to grow as a creator. And my second year of film school, I had some scripts, and I was like, "Hey, does anyone want to make this?" And everyone was like, "No, I have my own stuff to make," you know. And I decided what am I going to do with these ideas. And so I started writing essentially converted scripts into short stories. So my first 2 books, By the Ounce, The Other Tales, and Mass Transit, were just short story collections, because they were literally short scripts that were ignored, that I kind of did it for my own personal benefit. But then, you kind of want to push yourself and challenge yourself. That became the novellas, that became the novels, that became the comic books. And so it kind of grew from there. But yeah, originally it was me as a filmmaker, or a part of the filmmaking process, wanting to do something else. And everyone else is like, "Oh, and yeah, have fun with that, buddy."
What kind of format were you using in that? Were you doing Final Draft or something?
Yeah, Final Draft if you had money. So at the time, there was a freeware program called Celtics, and I was using that. But it was very similar in structure,
Yeah, when I was going from the writing world, like writing books and such, and then going and thinking, man, why didn't this could be a good movie, and why do you need a script when you have the book? You could just do the movie from the book. And then I started looking at script writing and understood that you'd have to have some sort of format to it. And that was originally why I started getting interested in script writing, because I was trying to find a different way to do dialogue tags in regular writing, instead of saying he said, she said all the time. And then I was like, well, how about in high school when you're reading Julius Caesar and they just have the name and then a colon and then their line? Can you do that in a book? Will that be too distracting? And I think it was too distracting for just reading in a regular novel. And then I started looking at script writing and how they set it apart down the center of the page. And that's how you have it more minimal than a book, because you just have the person's name, maybe how they say it, but likely not. Like you don't want to do that too much as far as my understanding of it.
So you're self-taught, 100%.
Yeah, I got the Sid Field book, read that, and I was like, oh, okay. And Sid Field said in one of the later chapters, as long as people understand it, do whatever you want. And I was like, oh, okay, well, there's some license there. So I got Celtec and a couple other ones. Final Draft I didn't do because that was an initial investment in that I was like, well, that's a little spicy. Mm-hmm. And I started looking at the format of other shows or movies, like just scenes from movies, and seeing how they were scripted out. And it changed the way I looked at film or just motion picture, where you go, wow, that's a lot of stuff you have to write for different camera angle, different scene, different setup, all those different lines you have to put in there. and it got a little distracting because I started thinking about that more than what I was actually watching. So looking at those scripts and then trying to find a way to write it myself, I realized that I didn't know enough about the format and what everything was called to be able to have a program that was useful, because I didn't know what I need to put where. So I just looked at the formats of the script and I started doing it myself in Word. And then a lot of people I talked to are like, well, that's a waste of time because you're going to have to put it all into the other thing anyway.
Right.
And I didn't understand why it was a big deal. I think it helped me learn the language of scripts to a point. And I mean, I'm not an expert on it. So it helped me learn a little bit of it, and then enough to where now I can see, all right, plugging it into a script program is going to be useful because it produces all those other things down the line that you need, like the call sheets, being able to group the sections of what's filmed where you could do it on a piece of paper, but it's just more complicated than it is in the program. So I see the use of the program. I also see the use in learning how to write scripts, because I think it makes writing books better, because it takes out the description and adds it's like what the character says is more important than anything else almost. So it's
Yeah, it's like a natural progression, because it's like these programs are like learning a new language. And so when you're responsible for the creative, you're kind of like, I'm gonna do it in the way I know and then learn this. But over time it does kind of come together. You're absolutely right.
yeah, you have to learn the language of a script and then the language of the program that
Hmm.
does the script writing. So it's difficult if you skip one to go to the other. So when you're writing scripts then, and you're changing those into short stories or novellas or full-length novels, did you find that easier? Like you had more space to work, or was it more like, oh, this is more work?
Ultimately, it's more work, right? Because now you're filling in details. You're filling out what the character was having for lunch, what they were feeling, what's going on, and how their parents met, depending on the chapter. But I will say there's some genres where that it becomes like a benefit. You know, if you're doing like a romance, or if you're doing like a war film, or if you're doing like a pensive film, filling in the details of what's going through the character's mind can be a really fun exercise. A lot of times when you're doing like sci-fi or action, you're trying to describe what exactly is this thing. Because in the scriptwriter, you could say, man pulls out future space gun, and then that leaves it up to like the production designer. But when you're actually are crafting it in a novel, you have to describe what that gun is. You have to describe what that weapon is, or that character dress, or whatever have you. That could be very much like a bit of a roadblock. So I found myself taking more time. I'll do like a dialogue pass. I'll do like a sketch detail pass, and then on my fourth or fifth or sixth draft, and really try to drill down what I want to convey with imagery when I'm making it into like what we call prose, right? Prose format.
Right. How do you see the action in your mind then? Is it from the film school side of things? Is it you're viewing it like you're watching a movie, or when you're writing, how are you visualizing it?
That's a very good question. There is a film school format about making sure that the action is always dynamic, right? Make sure that something is always happening. And if you ever read the book Save the Cat, you could tell almost every Hollywood film in the past 40 years has felt that format. Every 4 pages, something has to happen. But if I am doing my first novella, High Desert Run is what's called a neo-western. So it takes place in present day, but it has the tropes of the Western. A lot of that Western feeling is the expanse of space, right? You're out there in the city or under the stars, or, and still stretching that out. So a lot of times there isn't much going on as far as like what I'm seeing, what I'm visualizing, or I should say there isn't so much action, but still you want to be able to write to the detail, because and almost a magic trick of writing a book, that if you spend a page and a half on details, it kind of slows down the pace of the book. So if you want to talk about the stars and there's one little caterpillar in the corner hanging out, you can, if it's your intent to draw more of like the background in an actual scene. If you're like, hey man, two cowboys are outside and then a gun goes off, you could do that too. But that's a very quicker pickup for, say, an action novel or something along those lines.
I like the caterpillar example because you could read a book about it and it's you could have a page more or less of the character noticing this caterpillar, and then in the show it would be the character's doing whatever, and then you just see them see the caterpillar. Maybe you get a quick shot of a caterpillar, and then it continues on. And the people that read the book have that other future insight, or that the deeper insight into what's going on in the character's mind. But it's left up to you to distinguish what that is when you're watching the show, and you're like, oh, okay. It's
Oh yeah.
you wonder how much in movies you see those little things that you go, wow, there's a whole story behind why they just showed us that. Just like when you're writing a book, when they say the writer knows every line that's in it, I think the better you are, the more you know each of those lines, because you've thought about them so much and constructed each of those sentences through, maybe not the first time you put it together, but certainly by the 20th time you've gone through it, you're sick of reading it. So you've tried to piece it together as simply as possible,
Yeah.
or as artistically as possible, I guess, too.
It's interesting, not so much about writing, but like when it comes to the comedy side of things, when you do stand up, and people always ask, how do you like remember your bits? And I always say, just say it out loud as much as you can over and over again, because what happens over time is that you focus on what's important of the story or the jokes, and then you kind of discard what's not. And so there is a bit of an economy of words too. I mean, some authors don't really write all flowery language. Like you picked up a J.K. Rowling book, her stuff is more dense than say Ernest Hemingway, but they're both good authors on the written word for different reasons.
Yeah, Hemingway is one of those, when people are like, well, if they say, yeah, that's a great writer, and you go, it's good. I think in its day, it was probably hit home a little more because I think people had less leisure time and they were more nose to the grindstone. At least that's my vision of it. That's my feeling of it. And then when you read a book like that, you have a little bit of escapism because you don't have a computer or all these other routes to be able to look at different places in the world. Like you can't take a trip to Spain and watch a bullfight and drink a beer on a platform in the Riviera, but you could read Hemingway explain how he did it. And it wasn't exactly, I mean, it's definitely not the purple prose. It's not overly done. It's kind of matter of fact, regular words, which is nice. It's easy to read. But then when you read like a movable feast and you go, this is just a guy talking about walking around Paris, meeting writers and writing in coffee shops. It's like, okay, I guess this is entertainment. Maybe it says something about society now, how a simple book was more entertaining than all the action of now, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing about art because it really is open to interpretation, Like you remember 20 years ago now how the whole world was gripped by Dan Brown novels? And he still writes, by the way, but his style is very much him. And if I was in school and I wrote something in that style, it would be sent back and be told, hey, look, man, you gotta like tighten this up or whatever. So like you were saying before, sometimes if it's clear and people get it, there is some open interpretation to that. But you're right, audience changes, what we find funny, what we find offensive, what we find romantic changes over time. It's always a fun dynamic when it comes to creating art, understanding the contents of when it was made, and seeing it with our sensibilities today or a certain time period in the past.
With script writing, then, especially going to film school, do you think that I guess this is a sentiment you hear a lot, which is if you want to make a film, then you need to make a film. You make it, and instead of trying to find somebody else to make it.
I give film school a lot of credit, right? Like it because I had no practical experience. I came from television, so my undergrad I did more like news gathering, right? More like newsreel stuff. Like this weekend there's an opening of a museum, but like actual narrative stuff was cool because you get to make your mistakes in film school, and that's what film school really is for. To get your bad stuff out the way, have someone there who has theoretically more experience than you saying, this is what I would do. And then when you go out, then go ahead and make things under your belt. But you can almost always be self-taught because film is kind of like a rhapsody. There is a structure, but it's kind of loose depending on what you have because everyone has different budgets. Now, I appreciate film school because I have some friends there. I learned some technique there. But I did get bogged down with learning things and doing things the right way. I need these permits. I need this light setup. I need this particular equipment. Whereas my friends who are filmmakers who didn't go to film school are like, here's my idea, here's my budget, let's make it work. So it's almost like we have like this weird symbiotic relationship where I would impart my technique and what I've learned, how they can maximize what they have, and in turn give me the motivation just to do it and not be stuck in my head. So there is a bit of like a fluid there.
Yeah, I like that. I think it helps to look in both worlds to be able to understand the technical side and then the side that has, I guess, that innocence or ignorance of, I don't know that I'm not supposed to be able to do this, but I'm going to do it like this. And maybe I'll stumble across something that someone could have taught me in 10 minutes. And it takes me a year to figure out how to do a certain shot. Or I could come up with something that's really original that other people in film school wouldn't do because they were ingrained to do it these other certain ways.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's that formal technique versus street styles versus self-taught. That's why I have so much adoration for those people who are creative, who are self-taught. Like I went to school twice. I went to school for television production, I went to school for film production, and then I went out and did my own thing. But someone having the drive and going, I'm going to put these tools together. It may not be film school standard, but what is that really? You know what I mean? What is that's just one interpretation, one flavor of the art, or whatever that may be.
Yeah, I had a writing teacher at one time that said it doesn't matter how you do punctuation, how you set up your story, any of that stuff. What's I mean, it matters, but what the overwhelming always is does it make sense? Can people understand it? So if you're going to make a film that is different than convention, are people going to understand it and get it? And if they do, that's the success. If you write a book that's different than other people have written, you don't follow the act structure or whatever, but if people can understand it, then that's what's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Teachers on the money there.
Where do you think then, for all of that creative stuff, how do you feel like you engage with creativity at the most raw? Like, where do you think creativity comes from?
That is a very complex question. Because there is a bit of nature versus nurture there, right? Because it all about comes down to your perspective, and some of that stuff that you have, right? You can't choose your mom and dad, you can't choose the neighborhood you grew up in, you can't choose your ethnicity or background, but then you are a product of your experiences as well, like where you live, where you went to school, who you married, the personality of your children can somehow have an influence as well. So it's a mix of all that stuff. You know, I'm from a large town on the East Coast. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and that comes with a very sense of sensibilities. You know, I'm a city cat, and I live in LA now, which is also a city thing. My college years, I was in a small town the first time, and so just seeing the different walks of life can really, you know, you can pull in and amalgamate the things you come with. So meeting different people, different cultures, especially as a comedian, that's something that like hits me because we try to find patterns that are similar through everyone and as well as different at the same time. So you'll notice on stand up, we all have certain needs. We all want to laugh. We all want to have a good time. We want to be able to really express what's happening in the world the way we all understand. But you'll notice every particular comic uses that differently. I'm talking about the differences between us or the similarities we have. I'm like this. My wife is like this. Hey, have you ever noticed that these people do this? Right? And so it is kind of like understanding both sides of the pattern versus non-pattern. But to answer your question, I really feel like it comes from perspective. Perspective is something that just gets built over time. You're born with a base, and then you kind of tack on based on what you've gone through.
I like it. Perspective. Yes. So then when you're doing different things, whether it's comedy, TV, film, the kind of the sportscasting type angle, do you feel like when you're connecting with the creative force of that each one is a little bit different or that it's all the same?
I think everyone has their own particular nuance, but when I approach a job or a gig or an experience, I call them jobs. I know some people are like, they're not jobs, they're arts, man. But when I approach a job, it's can I inform and entertain? And so to me, that's my through line. That keeps things that sound disparate similar for me. So my sport casting is typically, I do boxing and combat sports, but I'll say most of the hours of me being in the booth, it's either baseball or esports. And esports are like professional video games. And they're two different audiences. I mean, people who are pro video game players are like 13 to 20, and then you retire and go to college. That's pretty much what that is. On the flip side, when you're playing baseball, you don't get to the major leagues until you're in your mid-20s if you're lucky. So when I come into a situation as a commentator, yeah, I'm telling what's happening on the screen, so I'm informing you, but there's a secondary goal underneath that. Can I find a way to tell you what's going on, to add value, to be entertaining and not be annoying because I'm there for hours on end? And so it is kind of like endearing yourself to the audience, putting the medicine in the mashed potatoes to really make something happen. Stand up is very much the same way. You and I probably have went to a comedy show and someone has an agenda and they're just telling you that agenda for an hour. No jokes, no setups, no premises. It's just what they believe. And it's like, okay, great. Are you going to make me laugh or are you going to make me have a good time? I mean, I know you want to make me think, but it has to be kind of a song and dance there. So when it comes to the creativity and the written word and how I consider myself a writer first is you have a thesis, you have a hypothesis to that thesis, and then you try to support that with anecdotes or fun tidbits or something to add a human element. And hopefully the package of that gets consumed by your audience. It says, hey, look, I was informed, I was entertained, I know where this guy's coming from. He's not preaching anything to me. He's not telling me why I should care, but I do care because of these particular reasons. And that can change too. I mean, every audience has their own experiences. They have their own backgrounds. Kind of a crazy example. If I'm doing a show for recovering alcoholics, obviously I don't do alcoholic jokes, right? Because this audience has a collective experience where you wouldn't want to do that, for example. But I do think it's kind of a song and dance on that level.
If it all starts with writing, then what is do you set time aside each day to write, or when those ideas occur, how do you make note of them? If you're just walking around in the grocery store and then you have an idea, are you taking notes then?
Yeah, that's actually a good point. So I have a podcast. It's called New Amsterdam Radio, and I'm sorry I'm reaching over here, but it started off as a notebook company because I used to walk around with a notebook all the time. Like I would something be kind of cool. I would write it down on my notebook. I mean, now there's apps for that. I can tell you I use the Notes app and on my iPhone. I also use the OneNote app with my PC. If something comes up, a lot of times if I see an experience, I talk to myself in the car. Like I was telling you earlier about saying your bit over and over again. If I see something, I say it. I try to like pretend I'm telling someone else who's not in the room the story because then I can see what's important and what's not. Like if you told me, hey, did you know the capital of Australia was Canberra? I will go, okay, the capital of Australia is Canberra. How would I tell that to the story? Did you know? No, that'd be kind of lame. I know. I'll make a bit about how this is different to me, and I'll say DC is different than Canberra because, like, I'll try to play around with that in my head before even writing it down. Because you're right, I do have a lot of buckets. Is this going to be a stand-up thing? Is it going to be an intro to a podcast? Is it going to be something I'll slip in as a joke or anecdote inside of a wrestling commentary? I got to know what that is first before I write that down and to put what bucket it is. So I guess I spend a lot of times talking to myself is the answer to figure out what that looks like.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense because a lot of it is so much of commentary that you're going to have to hear how it sounds. I think that's different than writing.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're just writing a book, you're probably not saying those things out loud. But if you're thinking about a bit, of course, it's going to help say it out loud or something you're telling someone.
Right.
Yeah, that's good stuff. So I was of the age too where notebooks is what I normally took notes in. So I'd have them all the time, even, from intermediate school forward of just writing ideas down. And then when I got the iPhone, that really changed a lot of things because it made it simpler, easier to organize. And then I can put it in a notes app. And I used to like separate it in different folders. I still have some different folders. Like I'll have comedy bits in one, short story ideas, justified quotes from the show Justified, just because when I watch that, I gotta write these quotes down because I gotta fit these in.
Was the
a
reboot
couple
worth
times
it?
a
I
day.
haven't got around to it.
Did they
City
they
Primeval, was that
redo
worth
the?
it?
I haven't seen that one yet.
Okay.
Just the original
Okay.
Raylan Given ones, where when I was doing police training in Oregon, like training police, I would use character names from Justified and try to put in quotes from Justified because they all said I had a Southern accent because I came from Virginia.
Okay.
And when they do a Southern accent out there, it's really terrible. And I was like, there's no way I sound like that.
Yeah.
But I would try to put things in from, Raylan Givens quotes. So I had them in my phone to refresh my memory. But
Boy Crowder, right?
it, yeah, yeah. Win Duffy, I use that name a lot for some reason. Just, Boyd was too much. It'd be too much for them out there. They couldn't handle that. So we dug cold together. So now on the iPhone, basically I have one notes thing, and I'll put in, if it's a poetry thing, I'll usually put a date and a time with it just so I know when that idea occurred. If it's something from a character in a book or a story, then I'll just put that in there. And then eventually it gets to this multiple page, like you can just scroll through it and you get to the point where you're like, okay, I have to organize this and move it out of the notes feature because it's just too much. And you don't want to lose it all either.
Right.
And I email it to myself and then I put it in Word and then try to separate it into different files of, is this poetry? Is this writing? Is this something else? Is this a grocery list? All these different things. And then I'll either use two screens and put it up on a bigger screen so I can see it and divide it that way, or I'll print it out and then cut those pieces of paper into strips and organize them in piles of, especially if it's a book, like this is this character's name, this goes with this chapter, this goes with this chapter, and then it helps organize it better. I think that's one of the things that keeps people from writing. Number one, they don't write the stuff down. So when
Right.
they have the idea that occurs, it occurs and then it's gone.
Yeah.
And that only has to happen a few times, I think, to somebody that wants to write something down before they go, well, I need to write that down so I don't forget it. I'm not going to remember that. If I wake up in the middle of the night with this idea that maybe is good, maybe is bad, I can't tell because I'm still sleepy. But I write that down and now I have it instead of just forgetting about it altogether. So I think that's how the creative force is interacting with us. And when we interact back, it recognizes that and goes, oh, okay, you want some stuff for characters? Here you go. Here's a thought. And you're just in the grocery store, you're doing whatever, and you go, oh, that's good. I have to write that down. So that now you're on your path to becoming a writer because you wrote it down. But then how do you get it from the notebooks, from the notes or whatever into the next thing so you can refine it even more and eventually come out with either a script for some sort of broadcast or for a book or for a poem or whatever. So
Well,
how do you organize all your notes?
Well, for the first time, you said a lot of things that were pretty smart there. The reason being is that I used to be all willy nilly with my ideas, and
Mm.
I had that moment with the OneNote app. Shout out to Microsoft, where I had lost about 18 months of comedy material. And of course, material is something you're supposed to make all the time, but that was absolutely devastating at the time. You know what I mean? And so yes, always back up your stuff is what I'm getting at. And I got to give another shout out to Douglas Neff, who is an author. He calls himself, and this is his words, not mine, the Tony Robbins of nerds. And he has a book called Epic Win. And he says, much like what you were saying, the idea theory is that ideas are out there in the ether, the universe, whatever idea you want to extract, and they attach ourselves to our brains. And we have a certain time to interact with them, or else they'll detach from our brains and go to somebody else. This is why you'll see someone with your idea, and you're like, oh man, I had that same idea 3 weeks ago. But yes, sorry, that's all preamble. But when
Mhm.
it comes down to writing things that I can tell you exactly what I'm doing right now. I'm practicing for a ring announcing event. I can't tell you the actual vendor now, but I'm got to say things out loud in the arena. And one of the things I've been thinking about is fake fighters, like hometowns, cities, weight classes, just trying to from Chicago, Illinois, weighing 200 pounds or whatever, Joe Smith. And I've written them down whenever I have an idea. And I look at a map and I go, all right, this guy's going to be from Newcastle upon Tyne, England, United Kingdom. What ends up happening is I really take days. I'll schedule days. I'll say this past Saturday and have like, okay, I have these bins of these random ideas, almost like Legos. Do these fit together? Do these fit together? Is this a comedic thing? Is that worth an essay? I have a comedy blog. I can write this for the blog. No, I want to say this for a bit. No, I think this is actually a grounds for a cool character for a comic book I wrote. This is actually what happens too. No, I want to use this for this fake character for my training for boxing ring announcing. So I do think there is kind of fun for me to sit down and play around with these sandboxes and see if anything works together, any storylines work together, any character interactions work together. Does this guy sound related to that guy? It's put them all and really take time to say, close out all of my meetings today. I'm playing with my creative ideas that were just kind of like tendrils the couple of days before.
Nice. Do you visualize, especially coming from film school, do you visualize different sources of that creativity? Like is your writing, maybe it's more of a muse type of idea, or the mind space, I think is how I think of it, is more of like, if I'm thinking about poetry, it comes to me from a seemingly another place. I mean, I can write regular poetry myself and I can tell the difference between me writing it and kind of inspired writing. And I picture it as a dark forest where you're going through. It's this barrier between worlds. Maybe you can't go into it, it can't come into yours, but you can cross over in this forest type place, and you're just going through these pathways. And if I start thinking about that, visualizing it, then I can get in that poetry mindset. But that's not the same mindset for writing a book, and it's not the same mindset for writing something funny or whatever else I'm working on, essay.
Yeah, that's actually a good thing that you said that, because I think I do something similar. When I'm in my announcing training or when I'm trying to do things for commentary, I go to YouTube and I look at giant aerial shots, right, of cities, of arenas, and I go, we're here live in the shadows of Los Angeles for whatever. And that's something that puts me in that space, right? Because I remember growing up and hearing voices. I'm old enough to remember Tim McCarver, right, when it comes to baseball, and hearing him make me care, or David Croft in F1, or Michael Cole in WWE. They're just very good at setting the table. My novels, it's kind of a guilty pleasure. I put on Celtic Woman, which is that PBS brand. The 5 or 6 Irish singers, they always swap out every 6 months, so you can't really have a favorite. I put that on when I'm actually writing prose. So I'm writing novellas. I do that because the central tones of the songs kind of make me feel dramatic, and I'm writing drama. It's kind of along those lines. And with comedy, I don't necessarily have like a visual muse, but I would say most of my comic books comes with physical insertion. So if I'm out for a jog and something hits me while I'm running, usually I'm like bowling over laughing. I'm like, oh man, that makes total sense. Like, and I don't know why that is. I'm not sure if it's because my body's distracted, my mind can have more fun with it. But I say most comedy bits come from either the shower or when I'm like taking a jog or at the gym or in the batting cages, just using my body doing something else.
Yeah, same. So I think that it's more of that creative thing, whether it's all in your mind or you're interacting with some energy outside of your mind, however you want to think of it, that the more you show up, the more it recognizes you. And that's why sometimes you have an idea that occurs and then it just goes away because it's like, well, you're not interested in that. I'm going to go give that to somebody else. And as you said before, you'll see your idea that you had years ago. Now it's a movie and you go, oh, man, should have done something with that. But that's out there in the ether doing whatever it does. But I think if you say, I'm going to sit down here and I'm going to think about writing, or I'm going to think about writing comedy, or I'm going to think about broadcasting or whatever, that's starting that connection with that part of your brain or whatever it is outside of you. And then when you get to the point where you're doing something like running, cutting the grass, swimming, whatever, that your mind switches off enough from the everyday to where you can then hear that creative force that's going, hey, what do you think about this? And I think it's always there. It's just we cover it up with everything else. I think about the classic cave person where they're worried about survival. But then one day somebody was like, well, I'm just going to draw a little thing on the wall here. And then somebody else sees it like, well, you're wasting your time. We got to worry about the saber-toothed cat out here. But then after you finish the hunt and you've eaten, you're full and all that, and then you're like, well, I'll just make a little mark on the wall here. And I think that's how, even now, how we have to open ourselves up to, or quiet our mind enough to be able to hear that creative energy that I think is always there. And then once you recognize it, you realize how to get into that zone for it more, and it also realizes it. So you're both reaching out, and you got the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo, God reaching out to man, and you're like, there we go.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. When I first started doing comedy, I had a day job, and it was easier for not easier. I mean, what was sleep, right? But it was easier to say I'm gonna give my job 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and then at 6:30 I'm gonna go and do whatever the heck I wanted. And so yeah, it was I gave my brain to my boss, and then when it was done, took it back, went to the clubs, and I did club shows in LA and San Diego all night, and I was hitting those reps. About 2 3 years later, after my job had let me go, I became self-employed. And so I became a DJ auctioneer that you can book now. And so I was hunting for my own food. And I found myself, my brain, not being able to go into comedy mode that easily. If I tell myself, yo, we're going to sit home, you're going to write, okay, I can do that. But it wasn't coming bucket to drop because I was responsible for all my meals, all my pay, all my income, and it was a transition process. So there has to be truth to that. And not to compare myself to anyone, but I don't have children. So I don't have to do about homework. I don't have to worry about picking up kids from school. Those who do have that extra challenge as well, because you have to make sure there's time for that as well. So I'm with you 100%.
Nice. What is your writing space like then? If you sit down to actually say, I'm going to write something, where are you doing that mostly?
So there's two kinds. If I'm doing just the character stuff with the Lego thing I was saying about putting things together and trying to find things, it's usually at a formal computer thing. I like the lab setup, so I try to sit up right and have like a long table if I'm outside of my bedroom. If I'm here in my bedroom, which I'm recording this, I have my computer set up. I feel good doing that. But if I'm like just trying to field ideas or trying to see what's working for me, yeah, I'm outside in a more casual environment with a notebook. If I'm in the batting cages and doing the physical exertion, or if I am listening to music, I'm in the car hanging and driving, and I'll pull over and I'll write a couple of things. So to me, it's a bit of a two-pronged attack there. If I say, hey, look, an hour, I'm going to drive around at dusk and see what hits me, it's similar but different to, hey, Thursday, 11 a.m., I got to get that first chapter out because I told myself I would. Let's get to work and become surgical with it.
Nice. Do you have writing groups that you go to, or other people that you bounce ideas off of, or
Absolutely not.
just
I can't do it.
okay?
I can't do it. I respect those who can, because you ultimately need iron to sharpen iron. And even if you're a self writer, you need people to read your stuff. If you're a self comedian, you need people to see your stuff. But I always find myself maybe subconsciously or consciously holding back when I'm in a room with someone. If it's like, all right, I'll go, then you go. I always find myself doing the 90%. I'm not sure it's because of decorum. I'm not sure it's because I'm just an introvert. I feel like I gotta go. Sometimes you gotta go 105% and see how bad it could be and pull it back. And I usually go on my own for that. I'd rather have strangers I've never met before tell me that ain't Nate, dog, so I can pull it back. Then a friend go, well, I would change this too. And also, if you don't, now I'm ranting now. We never give our friends the opportunity to have no opinion. We always go, hey, what you think? And as a friend, you go, oh, that was great. Or, hey, try this. But when I invite friends over to a show and they said nothing about my show, I've learned to accept that as being like, okay, they weren't moved either way. We don't do that in groups. We kind of just pressure each other to be like, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Give me some notes. Give me some notes. Like, where I always feel like the audience should tell you, hey, that wasn't funny. Or like, hey, you blew it there. Or hey, that was really good. You got something there.
It makes sense. Makes sense. With podcasting, then, how did you get started, or what was the first idea where you're like, well, I think I'm going to do a podcast?
Oh, the first idea, I was doing it in my basement in high school back when it was called internet radio. But the first modern podcast was I used to be weigh about 400 pounds at one point, and I lost a bunch of weight, about 26.9 stone, which is about 375 pounds. And so my first podcast was called 26 Stone because 27 Stone didn't sound nearly as cool. And it was about like overcoming your greatest obstacle. For me, it was being 400 pounds in my 20s, right? It was like, I'm supposed to be my prime, and I'm out there eating sandwiches, you know? Speaking of sandwiches, I lost the weight on Subway sandwiches, if you can believe it. But the first podcast in this group, New Amsterdam Radio, came from the ashes of that failed notebook company I was telling you about, because I had the domain name, but I had the idea of other creative people who were creating their own stuff, and I wanted to interview them and see what were their challenges. This is during COVID, where most creatives were told to stay home because they weren't essential, which I understood what essential meant in that context, but still, it sucks to hear. So
Mm-hmm.
I would go, hey, how do you feel, being a seamstress and being told you're not essential? And that's what it kind of started from there. So that was like really the first one, just a more of a human to human connection of creatives. But I've seen it evolve in asking creatives about not the first challenge of going out and doing their business or following their dreams, but the second and third challenge. How do you clear $50,000 in sales? How do you keep the culture of your business now that you hired employee number 5 and 6? Those sort of things. And I mean, it's been kind of cool to do that. So I would say, in earnest, I dabbled in podcasts in the 90s, but in earnest since 2019, I've been really going on doing this multiple times a week through different genres.
So when you're doing internet radio, was that RSS feeds, and then now it's different? I mean, if you're doing in the 90s and then
Yeah.
go to the mid 2010s or whatever, then it's a lot easier, I think.
Yeah, so I feel like an old man, but I think we're about the same age. It's kind of crazy. So at that time, there was apps like Lycos Radio and Live 365. So they weren't necessarily RSS feeds, but imagine YouTube with just audio. So you would launch a channel and it'll give you like the 200 megabytes of bandwidth a month, which is massive back then. You do a little 30-minute live show. There's a little soundboard, your little sound effects. You call it a day. And every Friday from 7:30 to 8, I would do a little hip hop wrestling show, which is totally a niche that no one really cared about except for me, but I loved it. And I'll bring my brother down and I'll interview him and I'll play a hot track I heard on BET that week. And then I'll talk about a wrestling match I saw, and it was in and out. And that was pretty much what it was. And I had at most 10 fans tune in, but it felt like the days of ham radio. These were fans that were theoretically on planet Earth tuning into my stupid show in my basement. And I thought that was pretty cool. So like the RSS era, like the post serial stuff, that came way later, because at that time I was like, podcasting was fun. I did that already. And then the whole world was like, yeah, this is a way different, kid. Like, and so I kind of came crawling back years later. And then so 26 Stone was in the year 2014, and then New Amsterdam Radio was in 2019. And in 2020, when I was at home with the whole pandemic thing, I launched my podcast network where I had a show for Netflix called Flobo Boyce on Netflix, wrestling called Draped in Gold, Star Trek called Commander's Log, and then just the list went on and on.
Yeah, it's when people start a podcast and then they're like, well, now I'm going to have this other one and I have this other one. And it seems like it gets, I mean, you got to be organized with it to be able to keep it going. My biggest thing when I started was consistency. Can I have a show that is, whether it's monthly, weekly, more than once a week, that can I keep that schedule going? And then how am I going to get guests was the biggest thing. What's the format going to be? Do I need guests? Nobody wants to listen to me by myself. So yeah, that's, I think, how we met up was on matchmaker.fm.
Mm-hmm.
And that service, because I first started, I didn't know about it. And I just got StreamYard after looking at a few different ones. And even back then, 2 years ago, StreamYard was different than it is now. Like it's gotten some better features now, but it wasn't bad then. But the extra camera and the the AI generated clips and those things came along. So that's good and it saved time. But I think the big thing was if I had to go through all the technical side of stuff where you film it audio and film and then take it apart and put it back together through some other program, that I probably wouldn't have done it, just because it's cool that people can do it, but it's not something that, I mean, CapCut's fun, but I don't want to, put a bunch of stuff in and take hours doing a podcast.
Yeah, I'm with you.
To
100%.
get it done. That's how you
Yeah.
talk to those people that say, yeah, I have 10 podcasts waiting to get published. I just have to do the editing. And you're like, whoa,
Yeah,
it's
what's
just
the
a
point?
conversation.
So you hit the nail on the head. I think there's the time where I want to be like a the podcast thought leader, but you're right. Consistency and format's the key, because we're not famous. If you were famous, you know what I mean? If you were some, if Lionel Messi started a podcast tomorrow, he'll have an instant audience. Most of us needs to have a cool format and be consistent with it. I will say, for me personally, during the pandemic, that was like my purpose. I felt good to have 10 podcasts, but as soon as the world opened back up again, a lot of those podcasts got sunsetted. I only have like 2 or 3 now, but you're absolutely right. That's super important. But I love StreamYard. I was an early adopter in April of 2020. We were before then, we had a studio in LA and did our podcast at AfterBuzz TV. And then StreamYard it just got bought by like this like webinar app. And so they had a lot of the core features that have it today, but it really was a raw thing. And I kind of volunteered as tribute to be a guinea pig. And so StreamYard is like had to be on like their Friday meetings or whatever, because I was just a guy that was just using it all the time. And so I'm kind of like embedded with it. Like, you know what I mean? There's other apps out there now, like that I could do things better, and there's like more streaming options and cheaper now because StreamYard went up market. But I'm kind of like torn to it. But I say all that to say is ease of use, because it's a link, right, to get people to come on your show. Your workflow isn't a headache, and anything to help you to have the time to do your show consistently is the secret sauce for any podcast. Because you can have the best idea on the planet, but if you're not doing new episodes, then what's the point?
Yeah, it's worked pretty well. I like the single link thing where you can just send somebody a link. They don't have to download anything. They can just go in and they're there. That's nice. And then when you put in the different services for getting guests or matching up guests with people that have podcasts, then that made it easier to where you could go, okay, I think I can get this many. And then I went through a time at the beginning of trying to seeing what was comfortable, like could I do 6 a week? Is that comfortable? And I was like, well, if Spotify wants to throw me some millions to do it, I could do 6 a week and feel okay about it. But I was like, that's like a job and a half, I think, going through everything from scheduling it to putting it out there. And then it came back down to a couple a week, and then to just 1 a week on Wednesdays. And I used to have so many guests scheduled that it's like out into the future 2 or 3 months. And because I didn't want to record it and then not release it until weeks later, I wanted it to be somewhat like try to get it out that same week or certainly within a month. And then with scheduling, I'm not sure how it is with you. I think I have, from people I send a message to, that maybe it's 50% of the people I have a contact with that actually come on the show. And then of that, every now and then you'll get somebody that just doesn't show up after they said they would. And then you're like, oh man.
Oh yeah. That's always fun. I think, not to make it a matchmaker thing, but that's why a lot of these services went paid, because that was happening a lot. Or I don't know about you, but I have my fill with business coaches. Like, I don't want to talk to a business coach for a long while, and that would be the MO. It'd be, I'll do your show, and then you can do all the paperwork and all that stuff, and then they don't show up. Or now people want to be paid to be on your show. And you're like, I don't have that kind of money. I can give you a copy of the call. How about that?
Yeah, this show costs what it pays, or
right.
It pays nothing and it costs nothing. So that's a deal. Well, then, with getting your format done, did you decide you were going to do a guest-based show at the beginning, or did you have shows that weren't guest-based?
I actually mentioned this in my book. It wasn't really my choice. so, so it's kind of a funny story. New Amsterdam started off as just me talking about things that were happening in the world and relating it to creatives. Oh, did you hear they're bringing back the XFL? Here's how they can achieve with a reboot. And you too can rebrand your work if you want to. So. Or did you hear about the new car coming out next year? You always want to refresh your offerings. This is how you do it. Anyway, so during the pandemic, I get a direct message from a girl I went to high school with. Her name is Farasia Solomon. I won't forget this. She goes, "Hey, I'm going to be in your show Thursday." I'm like, "Thanks, Farasia, but I don't have guests on my show." She goes, "Tough." And I was like, that was it. And so I spent a whole day, because it was a pandemic, of seeing if I wanted to have a guest, what would that look like? And I was using all these other tools that I since not use anymore and trying to get them on. But I think, and I kind of buried the lead or blew the lead, is that towards the end of that conversation of someone who really browbeat herself to be on the show because she has a new side hustle, she thought I was famous, was how are you maintaining being, because she was a nurse by day and a podcaster by night, of being seen as essential during the day, but non-essential at night. And I said, oh my gosh, this is like what I want to talk about. And so the first 60 episodes was that question. How are you feeling when you're being told you're not essential? That sense evolved into the whole entrepreneurship thing. But it really was somebody just saying, I'm being on your show. Deal with it. And I was like, okay.
Nice. What's the best way for people to find the show?
Yeah, it's called New Amsterdam Radio. That's KNEW, New Amsterdam, on your favorite podcast platform. I'm a Spotify guy, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. That's the main one. I also have a wrestling one. It's called Draped in Gold. You can learn more about that at drapedingold.com.
Nice. And then for just following all your work, whether it's the comedy and writing and other things, is there a website people can go to?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. Flobito.com, FLOBITO.com is my main website. Learn more about me, my background, and what I'm working on. And of course, the Instagram is at Flobito. So check out Flobito to see my face and also visual representations of what I'm working on. I also have a podcast about baseball. It's called In the Booth with Flobo Boyce. That is every other Monday. We talk to the people who support the sport of baseball, whether it's content creators or announcers or researchers when it comes to sabermetrics. And lastly, if you want to see my takes on comedy and sports and culture combined, you have to check out my blog. It's called justthesandwich.com. Justthesandwich.com. Like you go to a restaurant and you say you want fries with that, you go, no, just a sandwich. That's what you want to do. New posts every week. We have a lot of fun there. It's a comedic take of what's happening in the world of sports.
Nice. All right. I didn't see that one, but I think can you get all those through your website?
Yeah, if you go to the Instagram, they have one of those like link trees. You know what I mean?
Okay, I got the link for Just the Sandwich too. Good. I was looking at your stuff on Instagram and then your website. Nice, bright, got everything there that you need. I was looking at some of your clips of the esports casting, and I was like, yeah, this does make video games better when somebody's telling me what's going on. That I could see sitting down and watching that, whether it's because you know the people that are playing or because you've played the game, or just that switching your mind to a different gear of being able to just go, okay, I'm just going to check this out. It's something different, like the cars playing soccer. I hadn't seen that game before, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know anything about it, but now I can learn because somebody's telling me about it.
Absolutely. That's a good example. Rocket League's a perfect example when it comes to esports, because most esports are rated T for teen, right? Because they're usually like shooting games or fighting games. So Rocket League gets to be embraced by a lot of the younger kids because it's one of the ones that's for everyone. And to your point, I have two goals when I'm in that booth. One, to make the players feel like rock stars, and two, to help the parents understand why their kids are rock stars for playing a game about cars playing soccer.
Nice. Well then, maybe perhaps to wind things up, what are a couple things that you've learned through writing? Like, what has writing taught you?
I've learned that I'm a character person first. I know plot's important, descriptions are important, but if you don't really connect with the character, or what the perspective is being told through the character, then a lot of the intent could be lost, and that could translate with anything. If you're a copywriter for a brand, understanding who would say the words you're writing is super important. If you are a wrestling fan like I am, you say, hey, this guy doesn't really do it for me, because the character isn't strong. I'm totally on that camp when it comes to that. But more importantly, it's a lot of times you have to set things up. Even if you already know what it looks like, there will always be someone who doesn't understand or needs more clarification. Don't dumb down your content, but just know if someone's like, I didn't get that, like, don't take offense, because you have to assume that people don't get anything.
Agreed. Well, very nice. Thank you for your time. The links for your website and the other one, the Instagram and the Just the Sandwich and some other things are in the show notes in case people want to check them out. They didn't write it down. But thanks very much for your time. Any thoughts in closing or things you wanted to talk about that we didn't?
Oh, man. No, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's Hump Day every day right here, man. Thank you.
All right. I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit here.